Hello, this is Connie Marquez saying goodbye with her last week of classes, and this is the last video. And I wanted to close up this class with a video from my roof, from my terrace in Guanajuato City, which you can see over there. A beautiful colonial city that is kind of empty right now because we are enforcing the stay at home. Not too much the social distancing, though, I have to say. But a colonial city that has been occupied by different population since the 1540s, and it has been closely linked to the mining activity. Let's say it was kind of what Potosí was in Peru, Guanajuato, and Zacatecas, and others were to Mexico in mining production. Okay, so today I want to talk about the last week's topic. We're going to talk about the drug on war and current topics, and that's why I choose two readings that I hope you are able to read so you can do your last report about the war on drugs and the economical and social development of Mexico. These two books that I'm going to talk about today, these readings, are Oscar Martinez, Mexico's Uneven Development, and also a Narco History, which is a very interesting title, A Narco History, How the USA and Mexico jointly created the Mexican drug war. Let's talk about the uneven development of Mexico. This book is also dear to me as I was a student of Oscar Martinez at the University of Arizona. He was an specialist in border studies, a highly recognized scholar. He is an emeritus professor from the University of Arizona. Actually, he is now retired. And he was a very kind professor, very caring, very strict, and I took his class and it changed my perspective on many concepts that I previously had about why the USA is more developed than Mexico. And it's not only about the history, it's also about economical resources, geography, trading, ports and harbors, infrastructure, of course, industrialization, access to good roads, and development, of course, as of highways and transportation resources. It is a series of elements that constitute, and of course, the history of each country that constitutes the reasons why some countries, as he says, go in one direction and other countries go in another direction. So Oscar Martinez started talking about Mexico's uneven development by acknowledging that since its creation as a nation, Mexico has always been very uneven. We have today, and has always been like that since I guess Mexica times, a highly stratified society with an upper ruling class. And today we have few families that control Mexican economy, families that are very wealthy, insanely wealthy, I should say, like, for example, the Lebanese, Mexican of Lebanese origin, Carlos Slim, who happens to be one of the wealthiest men in the world. We also have several other families that are just unreal for what you might think of Mexico. But Mexico is a land of contrast. We have almost all kinds of weather, of climate, I should say, but we also have different social spectrums uh, with a fading away middle class, with an increasing lower class, and also with a shrinking upper class. that is now, I guess, few families, mostly of Lebanese, Jews, of course, Americans, Germans, French, families that have been in Mexico for decades. So, talking about the uneven development, Oscar Martinez points out something that was very famous a few years ago. And actually, remember the book by Eduardo Galeano, Open Veins of America? He goes into this theory, which is called the Dependency Theory, that talks about blaming the external causes for the underdevelopment. Everything comes from outside. It is the World Bank, the structure of plunder, as Galeano names it, that has Mexico and Latin America in these conditions. The dependency theory was used as a kind of a political banner as well to fight neocolonialism and neoliberalism, and to fight the external debt and the pressure that economical organisms such as the World Bank and the Monetary Fund, with a very bad reputation, uh, had forcing Mexico for decades to live under debt. And again, this is a reality also for most parts of Latin America, including wealthier countries such as Chile, Argentina, or Brazil, that are also suffering the strangulation, if you will, the pressure, the tide in the neck of the World Bank and the Monetary Fund, and you name it, right? So in the dependency theory, um, it talks about that the three imperialistic states um, constitute what he calls the predatory, what is it? Predatory corporate interests. Again, embodied by the World Bank, the Monetary Fund, and other organizations. Um, Chase banks, and I mean American banks and European banks as well. So, under this dependency theory, if Latin America is living on these difficult conditions, it has to do with external causes, with national debt, with unpayable interest rates, with a system of continual, perpetual dependency on international resources, and also blame it on the international companies that uh, still own many of the main industries. Although countries like Mexico and others in Latin America, particularly Brazil, have had a series of nationalization in their main industries. For example, in Brazil is Petrogas, which is the Pemex equivalent, and electricity and other companies. So the dependency theory blames the undevelopment in the exploitation and advantages that had put the countries within a perpetual dependency. That's what is called the dependency theory, because you depend on the others. Um, he also talks about neoliberalism, which is an economical and social theory, and I want to point out that because it has a pretty somber reputation, the neoliberalism, because it has been a system that the consequences, the resulting of imposing an neoliberal state is debt, poverty, lack of free institutions, free education, free medical care. Lack of that, everything is privatized, and that is also something to think about when we see the numbers and the national debt of Latin American countries. I don't think there's a single Latin America country that has no debt. Actually, even the USA has an international debt. I mean, it's everywhere, right? So Oscar Martinez, develops this scheme of development that you will see in the reading, this chart, in which he puts four states of development. One are the natural environment, which is, for example, the location of the country, the size, the climate, the topography, the coasts and harbors. The second are the natural resources, of course, self explanatory, the soil, the water, the mines, the minerals. Then population dynamic, which is also can be as an asset, but also as a handicap when you talk about an overpopulated country, which Mexico for sure is. So the social dynamics, the size of the population, the distribution of the population. Mexico has extremely uneven population distribution where most of the central part of Mexico is highly populated because that's where the jobs are basically, right? But also the climate is much better than in desert Sonora or desert Chihuahua or super warm coast or Yucatan Peninsula. So it has to do with the climate, but also with the resources, with the jobs, the immigration to big cities that are mostly in the central part of Mexico. Then he also talks about the relations with other countries. That's the fourth step in his analyzing the development of, in this case, Mexico. And he talks about the relations with other countries, the conflicts, which Mexico have had several, the intermission of other countries, which again Mexico has a lot to say about it, particularly with her neighbor, the USA, and also the colonialism, the neo-colonialism, the trade, the capital flow, the border issues. So these relations with other countries are very complex. And then he talks about the structure of production in Mexico and how this structure of production brings a structure of governance, and as well these political institutions playing a key role in the development of the nation. To conclude this reading, because I want to talk about the narco history again, uh, we can say that it is a reading to think about rather than, oh, it's because Mexico has had many wars or it's because Mexico is inferior. Because I've heard all kinds of explanations of racial superiority and saying, oh, Mexicans are lazy. Mexicans don't like to work. Mexicans are just not smart enough. They need to have, their leaders need to be educated outside Mexico, like in the neoliberalism governments like Salinas de Gortari. I mean, all of them, they have had uh, graduate degrees from the USA. So it is a very interesting reading. And again, it's talk about Mexico, but this is the structure and the model that can certainly be applied for other countries in Latin America. Now let's talk about a narco history. Now the title is highly provocative. It is how the USA and Mexico jointly created the Mexican drug war. Well, the date is 2006. President Fox announced it flamboyantly. All medias are called into this speech, and he says Mexico has now officially started the war on drugs. Mexico is planning a national strategy with the army, with the marine, with all the armed forces to fight drug distribution, production, and the drug cartels or drug lords. So the Mexican drug war reading begins with a very, very sad, infamous story of the 43 dead students in Ayotzinapa, in the bloody state of Guerrero, in the coast. And this is a story that you can certainly research. The Ayotzinapa 43 or 43 dead students in Mexico. Um, and they're called the disappearing students that were kidnapped, and their bodies were never found. It was a big scandal on the last president, Peña Nieto, and the crime has not been solved at all. And I wonder if it ever will. So, the Mexican military and the armed troops, the federal armed troops, were sent to this war in 2006 with President Vicente Fox, a very peculiar president who insisted, actually owns a factory of cowboy boots. And also, the USA Department has had a lot of saying in this campaign of the war on drugs, and has been warning uh, troubling warnings for to come to Mexico with, of course, with reasons. But the Mexican drug war is also, according to this reading, a creation of America, a USA creation. Initially, there was this idea of the USA is part of the war because the US is the main market to consume or to use these drugs. But now there's not only a passive idea of the USA role in the war on drugs. It's also the USA is created, and there have been different campaigns in which there's a clear cooperation between the CIA and other government, FBI, other governmental institutions with the Mexican armed forces for organizing campaigns that have not been very quite useful. Now, the USA has not yet, I hope not, honestly, uh, come to Mexico even though they offered to aid on drugs, on the war on drugs. We had Giuliani, I guess you pronounce, the famous New York governor who came to Mexico City to work with the Mexican police on strategies on how to fight crime and violence according to his method and strategies that he developed in New York. And of course, that did not solve anything rather than his financial situation, because it was known that he was paid more than $1 million just to come and give seminars on how to prevent crime using New York model. So in 1914, the drugs were banned officially in Mexico, but the use did not spread widely until the 80s. And it's now a big problem. And one of the main problems came in the 2000 when the war was declared. So I hope you enjoy this reading of the Narco War, a narco history that is highly controversial. And I don't want to close this class with that, but it is a topic that I'm sure you found in many of your Latin American research for your projects. The link of crime, drugs, instability, social unrest, economical uh, problems. It's just all tied up. So this reading constitutes a good approach in the 2000 decade, because I choose that chapter for the war on drugs when it begins. And in the last part of the reading, which is very short, there are screenshots, they're not really long pages, you will see. At the end, they talk about now what's next for Mexico. And the panorama, the ending, doesn't seem to be that easy. So I hope you don't feel bad with me saying that. I just want to say that it's part of our reality, and it was my goal as your professor in this semester to show you different aspects of Latin America. And sadly, one of the current aspects is the war on drugs and its consequences. And again, the uneven development that Latin America has compared to other nations such as USA. Well, it's getting dark. The sunset is here, and the dogs are barking. Oh my god, you have no idea how many dogs bark in the night. It's just like it used to be so peaceful where I live in Durango, and here it's just noise everywhere. The neighbors just turning the volume up of their music, and it's getting dark. But I want to say thank you, thank you for everything. I know I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But I really enjoyed being your professor. It was hard at times, and actually, I'm not sure if I will continue being a professor all my life or if I will do other things that I also enjoy to do to make money. But all legal activities, by the way, like be translator or continue being a tour guide once that this situation ends, right? So I want to thank you, and I hope to have a good projects from you. And don't forget to do your last weekly assignment, as you do need the points. Thank you very much, and my best wishes for you all.